Hello, everyone. We'll give it a few seconds. We know people are always trickling in right at the start time, so we'll give it a little bit and then we'll get started. All right, I see the number getting higher, so I think everyone's coming in. Welcome to our September webinar, The Surprising Relationship Between the Inner Ear and Fall Risk, which we're really excited about because it's Fall Prevention Awareness Month. And then we'll just quickly go over some Zoom housekeeping. So you're in Zoom webinar mode, which means you're automatically muted. You can't see the other participants and we can't see you, but you will be able to see the speakers and the hosts. You'll be able to ask questions via the chat box, which we'll get to at the end of Madison's presentation. The session's being recorded and will be available after today and is posted on our Central Anti-Aging website. So today we have Madison Levine as our speaker. As a second-generation professional in hearing healthcare, Madison founded her audiology clinic, Levine Hearing, in 2015 to provide excellence in patient care for the Charlotte area. A state-of-the-art balance diagnostic center was added in 2022, providing extensive testing for those experiencing dizziness, balance, and vertigo issues. Madison is a local advocate for balance and cognition screenings, as well as a national speaker on excellence in diagnostics and exemplary patient care in audiology. And I'll turn it over to Madison.
Thank you, Kristen. All right. I'm so excited to be with you guys today. This is one of my favorite topics. Like Kristen said, I love sharing with our community about the relationship between the ear and fall risk and cognition. And so here we are this week. We're in this falls prevention awareness time period. And you guys, if you're here, you probably have some concerns about falls for yourself or for a loved one. And I really hope that what I go over today will enlighten you a little bit and give you some other things to think about. So, to share a little bit about myself and why I care so much about this and why hopefully I'm the right person to be teaching you about it today. I founded my audiology clinic, Levine Hearing, at the Arboretum in 2015. Levine is my last name. It's not connected to the healthcare system, to Atrium, or anything like that. But I am second generation. So my mother had a hearing aid clinic when I was growing up. So for 30 years, she ran her clinic. And as a second career, I ended up deciding I have so much in common with her. And this was something that was really important to me. So I started my clinic from scratch. We were very focused on hearing care, hearing health, hearing aids. That's what we did for the first 7 years. Then a family member, my husband actually, had a terrible bout of vertigo. And if you've ever had vertigo, you know how awful it feels and how much you want relief. I sent him all over town, and at the end of the day, we ended up opening up our own vertigo clinic. So I'll tell you more about that as we go. But Levine Hearing, I've poured my heart into it. I want people to be treated the exact same way that I want my own family members treated. And I think that's part of why we have over 300 5-star reviews. We keep winning Charlotte's Best of the Best. And we hold ourselves to a very high standard. So we're members of the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce, Better Business Bureau. I've sat on numerous boards in Charlotte and that pertain to our aging individuals. And then I'm a Listen Carefully ambassador, where we host different legislators in our office to show them what is really happening on the patient side of things and how can they do a better job of advocating for you guys when they are looking at laws that are affecting healthcare. So that's a little bit about me and the clinic. So like I said, I love getting to educate. And so I have gotten lots of opportunities to do that locally, whether it has been with the expos, the conferences that we have all over town at different senior centers. I've gotten to speak nationally at many of the events that my colleagues attend, and we talk about what are the ways that we can make sure that we're educating patients so that we can be more preventative in our care, not just treating you after the fact, after a problem has happened. So today is all about prevention. How can we prevent a fall? So I don't know if you guys know this, but an audiologist is not just a specialist in hearing, they also are a specialist in balance and dizzy disorders. So when I started the clinic, we just stayed focused on hearing. But 2 years ago, we added a state-of-the-art balance clinic. And by that, what I mean is we have 2 rooms dedicated just to balance diagnostics. There are so many things that can go wrong in our ear system that have to do with our balance. I'm excited to share some of that with you. So the things that have the strongest impact on our fall risk, you guys probably already know. Your vision. If you have ever had to get used to bifocals or trifocals, that adjustment can be very challenging. Your depth perception can be off. If you've dealt with macular or anything that has impacted the way that you see light and dark and depth, we know that can impact your risk of a fall. Altered sensations in the feet. So your proprioception, that is how your body is interacting with things around you. So if you have neuropathy in your feet, or you've got drop foot, or different things that are causing your feet to stumble, to not have good, stable contact with the floor, fall risk. But the third one that we're going to focus on today is your vestibular system. The vestibular system is connected to your hearing system. They sit right next to each other. And what this really is it's your gyroscope. The vestibular system is what shows us how we're moving through the world. It gives your body the feeling of movement or of being still, of turning, and it is actually pretty delicate. There are a lot of things that can throw off that vestibular system. So this is something that I share. I'm on the circuit in Charlotte going into every medical office that'll let me in to give them talks like this. Primary care offices, especially when they have a patient come in and say, I'm feeling dizzy. The first thing that I want them to ask is more questions about that feeling of dizziness. Because on the patient side of things, a lot of times you don't have the words to describe what you're really experiencing. Dizzy to one person could be different than dizzy to another. You could mean that when you stand up from a chair, you're just a little bit lightheaded. Or you could mean that when you roll over in bed, the whole room spins and won't stop. Those are both dizzy, but they're pretty different. Regardless, 85% of dizzy disorders actually originate in the inner ear. But the most common thing that doctors immediately think of from speaking to hundreds of them, the first thing they think about is your blood pressure, which is good. Checking that first, looking at whether you're on medications that are having an impact on it, and talking about ways to watch those medications and maybe check in with your cardiologist. But if it's not the cardiologist that you need to see, then it's the audiologist. That's the next step. Because more often than not, we are actually the place where the problem lies. The audiologist is the one that's going to check it. Some audiologists can be found inside an ENT clinic, ear, nose, and throat doctor clinic, and some are in private practice like we are here, where we have all the equipment and actually more than any ENT in Charlotte. So we actually get a ton of referrals from ENTs to us. 40% of the population will seek medical care for dizziness at some point in their lives. So whether you have already had dizzy episodes to date, or whether it might be something in your future, some of the stuff I'm going to share with you today will hopefully make you more prepared to know what to do first. It's the most common reason for a doctor's visit for a patient over age 70. The most common reason. So here are some of the vestibular dizzy issues that we see in my office. Vertigo is really that true feeling of having the spins. You or the room feel like they are moving. And sometimes this can calm down on its own. Sometimes you can't even drive yourself to the ER to get help. Someone else has to drive you. Vertigo is one of the things that I'm going to really focus on today. Other things that we probably all have felt are motion sickness. And this is that vestibular balance system just a little bit out of alignment. Migraines. While you can have migraines in your temple, in your head that feel like pain, like a headache, you can also have a migraine in your vestibular system that can cause dizziness. It's little known, but there are great treatments for it. Low blood pressure, we know, can make you dizzy. Cardiovascular disease, low iron, low blood sugar, and you actually can have autoimmune diseases that affect the inner ear. Some of the common causes, some you can avoid easily. Others can happen, unfortunately, without even, much effort. An acoustic neuroma is basically a tumor that grows in the ear, and it starts to have an impact, putting pressure on that balance system. Barotrauma is when somebody has gone scuba diving, been very deep in water with pressure, and that can cause eardrums to burst. It can cause vertigo, bad things. Here's a big one. Benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, or BPPV. That's the one that I'm going to focus on the most today. BPPV is the most common cause of vertigo. It's the one I'm most excited about because it's the easiest to fix and it's the least understood. So people with vertigo end up getting the runaround and not really getting fixed quickly, even though it's very easy to fix. So I want to share this with y'all today so that whether it's you or a loved one, you know how to help them get resolve. You can have actual structural issues with the ear, like malformations of the inner ear, labyrinthitis or vestibular neuritis, problems in the inner ear that we find and diagnose. Mal de debarquement. I had this last week. If you've ever been out on a boat and you get back to land and you still feel like you're moving, it's mal de debarquement is bad debarquement from the boat. Your body just still thinks you're moving. And usually this just resolves within a few hours, as mine did. But in some cases, it can take months and need some treatment. Meniere's disease. I'm curious, I know you guys will be writing some questions in the chat today. I love having interaction during presentations, so I wish that I could talk to you guys right now, but Meniere's disease is one that many people have heard of, and I think that it is actually overdiagnosed. Meniere's disease is a trifecta of three things. It's a fluctuating hearing loss, it's tinnitus, which is a sound happening in your ears that's not really happening in the environment, and it's dizziness. Those three things. And I think that a lot of primary care providers are actually aware of it, and I have seen it thrown out sometimes when someone has described vertigo episodes where a doctor has said, it's probably Meniere's. Well, Meniere's is very specific and it really requires testing to diagnose that. The reason we want to get down to the right diagnosis is so that we can figure out, is this something that we can just fix right now? Or is this going to be an ongoing issue that you can't fix? And Meniere's, unfortunately, is one of those things that once you're diagnosed, you really live with it and you manage symptoms. So we don't want to overdiagnose it if we actually could fix the issue. And then, like I mentioned, migraines that can actually cause dizziness with or without a headache. They don't have to go together. So some of the testing that we do to evaluate the vestibular system, all of these are very important. Some of the ones that you might be familiar with, if you have ever had vertigo yourself, it's possible that you may have seen a doctor or a physical therapist or an audiologist who might have done positional testing, where they've moved your head around and watched your eye movement to see what the cause of your dizziness is. Now, if you've ever had vertigo and been given a handout to go home and do positional exercises, we're going to talk more about that in a minute, but I really do not like that. Without having a really good diagnosis from an audiologist, I don't love for people to have a handout that may or may not help them because it might not even be the right exercises for you. We have a very special piece of equipment. You can see in the corner this chair. The chair probably looks pretty simple. It's probably the most expensive chair you've ever seen. It's called a rotary chair. We put this set of goggles over your eyes and we watch the eye movements as the chair moves. The eyes are really the window into the ear. This is something that nobody in Charlotte has. Prior to us getting it 2 years ago, people would go to Wake Forest or Duke in order to get this testing. But what we want to look at is each section of the vestibular system. And most of the clinics in our area only look at 1 or 2 sections, not all 3. Really, the reason that I ended up starting the vestibular clinic was when my husband had a bad case of vertigo. I sent him to the independent ear, nose, and throat clinic that I thought would have a little more specialized care. Their equipment was broken and they didn't really have a plan for fixing it. So that was a bust. I sent him to a big ENT clinic and we never could really get a diagnosis, test results, calls back. He just got lost in the system. It was very frustrating. And that's when we realized this is just a hole in the community. It's something that we need to have so that we can help people get back on their feet and feeling better faster. So we purchased this equipment, and 2 years ago, we started doing this on a full-time basis. So let's get to how this connects with fall risk. More than 1 out of 4 Americans over the age of 65 falls every year. 1 in 4, that is a lot. We know that falls are the leading cause of fatal and non-fatal injuries among older adults. And here's the one that kills me. Repeated studies have shown that around 9% of seniors have undiagnosed BPPV. We're back to that tongue twister from a few slides ago. Benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, BPPV. It is so common. And to think that we have so many seniors walking around with almost 10% are walking around with this vertigo disorder that is so easily fixed but it's not being correctly diagnosed, the fall risk from it is so high. That's 1 in 10 seniors have it right now. So BPPV is the spins. Now, what can happen is that the first episode can feel strong. You can have that feeling of spinning. But as you acclimate, it's not that it necessarily is gone, but you learn not to turn your head that way. You learn not to move so fast, not to bend over so far when you tie your shoes. And so we start changing our habits in order to avoid the problem, but it is not resolved. In fact, it takes over a year for most people to end up with the right diagnosis in order to get it resolved. So let's talk about anatomy. Like, what is really happening when someone has this condition, and how is this inner ear system really affecting our balance? So I don't know how much you guys are interested in anatomy. I think this is so much fun. You look down the ear and you see the ear canal. It's just a tube. At the end of that tube is a solid piece of skin. That's your eardrum, also called your tympanic membrane. Nothing can get past the eardrum. It is solid. So when you go swimming, water fills your ear canal and it flows right back out. Now, if you know anyone who's ever burst an eardrum, maybe from an ear infection, they can have a hole in their eardrum and they don't want to go swimming because water can go through it, and you see where it goes. It goes into the cavity. We don't want that. But normally your eardrum is solid. Behind the eardrum are the 3 tiniest bones of the body. I would normally test you, but they're already on the screen. Malleus, incus, stapes. And why we have 3 other names, common names for it, I don't know why we would, but what are they? The hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. You remember those from like 4th grade? 3 tiniest bones. And they push on a little foot pedal that excites the nerves in the cochlea and sends sound to the brain through the auditory nerve. So that's the hearing mechanism. Sound is going through the ear canal to the eardrum. It's pushing on those little bones that push on the nerves that send the sound to the ear. We really hear with our brains, not really our ears. Now, if you look up just a little bit to where I have a red circle, you see a couple loop-de-loops. These are the semicircular canals, and this is your balance system. Now, if you've ever heard about crystals being out of place in someone's ears and causing dizziness, here's what we mean by that. It sounds kind of woo-woo. It sounds like it's not real. Like, how are there crystals in my ears? But there are. So let's take those loops and let's zoom in a little bit. So this is that same red circle, but we're zoomed in. Inside these loops, there's fluid, and there are tiny calcium crystals floating inside the fluid. And as you move forward, they bump the front, they bump the back, they bump the sides. The crystals bump, and your body is able to tell where you are in space because of that movement within your semicircular canals. It's just incredible. Now, you really have 3 loops on each side, crystals within all of them. If a crystal gets out of one loop into a different loop that it's not supposed to be in, it is irritating, it excites that system, and it creates feelings of dizziness. This is BPPV. A crystal is in the wrong loop. Now, what I see happen most often when somebody shows up at a primary care office or the emergency room and they have a feeling of vertigo is that a professional sees them and says, oh, probably BPPV, but they don't do any testing to see if it really is. They don't know which canal the crystal's out of place in. We've got a 1 in 6 chance, right, of choosing the right one. They prescribe meclizine, which is a Band-Aid. It's the most common prescription that basically knocks you out. It makes you sleepy. It does not fix the problem at all. It just makes you tired. And they give you a handout. And the handout generally says the most common exercise that, if done correctly, would get a crystal into a different loop. But which exercises are they recommending? They have no idea which loop is involved. I can tell you it's complicated, even for audiologists here in my own clinic. You know, sometimes we're stepping out to get a second opinion from a colleague. It's not easy. And so it's definitely not easy for your primary care doctor, who does not do this every day, to know exactly how to check this. So what really should happen is, if you suspect any type of vertigo or dizziness, the first professional to see is an audiologist, because let me tell you how easy this is to resolve. In a 10-minute maneuver positioning to figure out which loop is involved, the diagnosis is made. And in another 10-minute maneuver to move the right crystal into the right canal, it's resolved. It's that simple. So most often we just do same day vertigo treatments. 40% of us are going to experience vertigo in our lifetime. And the average patient sees 7 doctors over 500 days before getting resolution for it. And it's because there needs to be more education in the doctor's offices. They first think cardiology, maybe neurology, maybe go to a physical therapist. But if you don't have the right diagnosis in the first place, you're just getting run around and paying money to every professional until eventually, hopefully, you get to the right place. So I'm going to shift gears for just a second. We focused a lot on the balance system. And obviously, you guys can connect that if someone is having feelings of dizziness or occasionally having vertigo, it's going to have a huge impact on the risk of having a fall. But now I'm going to talk to you for a second about hearing. So there are many different ways that this affects your balance. I got to see a patient this morning who had very different hearing between her ears. Her right ear was much better than her left ear. Both had a significant hearing loss. So first of all, Johns Hopkins has done a lot of work. Dr. Frank Lin has spent his whole career just focused on hearing and how it affects our total health, from falls to cognition to longevity. And they found that an untreated hearing loss is correlated with a 3-fold increase in fall risk. Now, when I first read this 8 or 10 years ago, I was really surprised. I mean, I knew that having an asymmetry, having hearing different in each ear, could have a huge impact on your balance. But what I didn't expect was that the degree of hearing loss would have a bigger impact on risk of falls. So Dr. Lin found that a mild loss triples the risk, a moderate loss quadruples, a severe loss quintuples. So the more loss we have, the more risk. So why might that be? He had some hypotheses, and I bet that he's right. A couple reasons. Number one, we started this talk talking about the three things that can have such a big impact on your fall risk. It was vision, your vestibular system, and how you make contact with the world around you, your proprioception. Well, your hearing actually plays a big part in that, not just how your feet meet the floor, but your awareness of what's going on in your environment. If someone behind you slides a chair softly and you turn to move and you didn't even realize your environment had just changed, your fall risk has gone up. But another reason could be when you look at the brain and you look at the parts that light up when they're being used. When we are having to use more listening effort to understand what people are saying, we're having to make eye contact, we're leaning in, we're focusing, we're pulling energy from other parts of the brain towards the part that needs it. That could in itself be a reason that the fall risk is higher. And that plays into the reasons that cognitive decline is so much higher with an untreated hearing loss as well. CNN has picked this up several times this year. I'm so glad that they're putting some attention on it, that we know that dementia, some is hereditary, but the vast majority of dementia cases, it's environmental. And there are a lot of things that we can do to reduce our risk. Well, one of those is eliminating a hearing loss. And of the modifiable risk factors, they have them each at a percentage. Exercising, 3 to 4 times a week, reducing your risk by 6%. Each of these percentages. Treating a hearing loss reduces the risk by 8%. It's the largest percentage change, which I see it in my practice all the time. I had somebody this week who she came in seeming very confused. She had a very hard time following our conversations. And even though I was pushing my voice and really focused on communicating with her, she struggled. She had a severe hearing loss, I found. And when I put hearing aids on her, she immediately was answering all of our questions easily. And you can kind of imagine that when you're in a state of confusion and you're always wondering, why did they ask me that? Because you heard it wrong? Why is that going on? You're constantly not quite present. It just further compounds the problems of confusion and can make it more of a permanent thing instead of temporary. One of the other things about treating a hearing loss that I think is so cool nowadays is that we have fall detection actually built into devices. So there's only one brand that's doing this right now. I work with all major brands, so I'm very aware of what they have. And if you've explored hearing aids, you probably know they have all made up names. Starkey, Phonak, Widex, Oticon, Resound. But Starkey is the one who has fall detection built in. What I like about these is that it doesn't call 911. We put in up to 3 phone numbers of family, friends, neighbors. And if a fall is detected, they get a text message that says, George has had a fall. Now, when the fall happens, if George tumbles and says, his hearing aid will actually tell him, fall has been detected, alert has been sent. If he goes, oh, I'm fine, oh my gosh, y'all don't worry about me, he can push a button and it'll cancel it and send a second text to those people to say, George is fine, he canceled the alert. So that is a really nice extra layer of safety. And I have turned it on for most patients with Starkey hearing aids because they want to have that extra layer. So if you have experienced balance issues and not just vertigo, I focused on that a lot today, but If you find yourself walking down a hallway and hitting your shoulder as you're going around the corner, you're like, why do I keep kind of running into things? What's that about? I would highly recommend a vestibular workup. Most insurances are going to cover it, if not completely, then almost. Medicare covers it. And we are in network for most insurances. Getting that correct diagnosis in the first place can help you reduce your risk of having a fall, because then the appropriate treatment can be recommended. So a couple of the things that might happen if you're diagnosed with BPPV, we just treat it right there in the office by using some maneuvers to get the right crystal back in the right canal. If it is a vestibular one-sided weakness, which is also a very common thing that can happen, is that your system, one side is weaker than the other. We want to figure out which side, to what degree, and then you get recommended physical therapy. And we have many that are very good at tackling that kind of issue. And in 6 to 12 weeks, that vestibular weakness is compensated for. So for instance, if when you go through the grocery store, when you reach up to get the cereal on the top shelf, ooh, you don't feel so good. That's a really good example of what could be a one-sided vestibular weakness. Those are the things that cause us to get off kilter, off balance, and have a fall. So I really hope that this has been helpful for you guys. I see that I've got a few chats in here, and I'd love to answer y'all's questions. So thank you.
Let's see, we'll pop back on. There we go. Sorry, some of the chat was us trying to figure out some of the closed captioning. So, but if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat and we will read them out to Madison.
I'm used to having questions all throughout and just stopping and answering. And I know I just told you all about 1,000 things, and we get to the end and you go, oh, what questions did I have?
Are we saying great information? Here's a question for you. Oh, it's moving now. Why does BPPV happen?
Oh, good. I skipped that. That's important. So a crystal is in the wrong canal. Sometimes it happens from a head trauma, having a fall, a car accident, that kind of thing. But sometimes, especially as we get older, those little crystals get a little bit looser so that even small things can knock it out of place. Most often with my patients over 70, they'll tell me they actually just rolled over in bed one morning and realized they had vertigo. And it was just that motion of rolling that did it.
And then I saw somebody within the same topic. Can it be corrected and then come back?
Yes. Once you've had it once, you're much more likely to have it again in your life. But it's incredible how many people are walking around just living with it. Like we said, 9% of people over 65 are just walking around with it right now. But there is a small percentage of people below that. I see people all the time who come in here for other reasons, like a hearing test, or they want hearing protection made. And they'll just mention in passing that they have these random bouts of vertigo. And one of the things that happens is the first session of BPPV, you get a real spinning sensation. But then as you kind of get adjusted to it, like I said, you kind of habituate, you change your habits so that you don't excite it. And you can just live with it. I mean, even for years. If we got that crystal back in place, we would have good resolve for a long time.
Some more comments. I don't see any more questions. Does anybody have anything else before we close it down for today? Seemed lots of great information. So thank you, Madison. This was a great presentation.
I'm so glad. Good.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Y'all have a great day. Thank you for listening.